Can you think of a mind who navigates and redefines geopolitics like a grandmaster? The first person that comes to my head is Dr. Dattesh Parulekar. And fortunately, I have the privilege to host him on our channel today. He's a Fulbright scholar, a foreign policy strategist, and an academic powerhouse. His voice is trusted in global defense and global affairs. He has lectured at the top institutions of the world, shaping strategic thought among the young leaders. So let us dive deep into the realities of global politics and make it an unfiltered conversation with him. We welcome you, sir, on our channel.
Shahid, thank you for this very munificent introduction and lovely to be on your platform.
Thank you so much, sir. So first things first, that intrigues me
Yeah.
is that where did it start from? Like, I think it may be your childhood or when you were in college. Like, what was that one thing that sparked your passion for international relations, foreign policy? So there must be a starting point or an origin.
Absolutely. So in my case, it was quite freakish in that sense that, back in the 1990s when I was growing up as a young kid, uh, international relations did not exist. All that existed basically was political science, and it was a study of politics. So as an 11 or 12-year-old, I saw an inflection point in world history because 1991 was a time which was very eventful in world history.
Yes.
We of course had the Gulf War in Iraq that was over Kuwait, invasion. We had the fall of the Soviet Union. We had many other things happening, a bipolar world becoming a unipolar world, and that was the time that Star TV entered India. And for the first time, basically in our living rooms, we could experience these global events like never before. So it just happened to me, it kind of struck me as an 11 or 12-year-old kid that I would like to be passionately involved in current affairs. And what started then as a 12-year-old has remained insatiable, probably 30 years later. Just continue to get better at it. So I used to, in fact, sit up at 2 and 3 in the morning. This as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, just to follow the United Nations Security Council meetings on Somalia or on Rwanda. And I would wake up at 3 in the morning, see the entire press conference, hear Kofi Annan speak, and then actually present myself as Kofi Annan later and speak to myself. So I would do all of that thinking that I am the UN Secretary General. And that's how this curiosity for the subject grew. Of course, I never knew that my passion will actually become also my vocation, but as it did over time. But now having done it for 30 years now, so when people come and ask me, how do I do something like you? For me, it's honestly, and I'm not having any inflated egos here, it becomes very difficult to tell somebody, how do you become me? Because you actually have to be able to have that curiosity that has to come from within.
Yes.
It can't be something that, can be injected in you.
Yes. So you might be the firm believer of this Bollywood tagline ki शिद्दत किसी चीज को शिद्दत से चाहो तो
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
कायनात.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल बिल्कुल.
So, sir, like a follow-up question to this only. What are those career avenues for people to make a very lucrative career in this international relations and foreign policy? Like, can we become diplomats? How to become
Right.
a diplomat? For example, like this.
Yeah, so firstly, let me make the point that, while everyone talks of being domain specialists today, you must be a domain specialist. You must have a strong suit to go with. But that domain specialization today cannot be narrowly defined. Because today, when you want to make good careers, you have to have cross-cutting understanding of various issues. So even let's say if you're a lawyer, but you have no understanding of how society functions or sociological issues, or for that matter, even economy, technology, security, you may be able to answer your brief, but you may not necessarily be a lawyer who can be cerebral in that sense of the term. So that's one point. Today, many career options are at the intersection of disciplines. So you have to blend 2 or 3 disciplines to be able to make or carve out a great career for yourself. And I believe international relations is that particular specialized discipline. It has branched out of political science that is truly interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary.
Right.
It's interdisciplinary because when you are studying international relations, you are studying international politics, international economy, international security, society, culture, everything.
Right.
Now, for students who decide to pursue international relations, there are 4 or 5 avenues for them, or pathways, if I may say so. The first is obviously that if you're looking for a career in the foreign service, then that certainly is something that is very important. And a master's in international relations prepares you to be able to not just answer the actual UPSC written exam, but actually gears you up for the interview.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about writing the exam. Once you clear it and you make the final cut, you should be able to answer the interview, where you will be asked questions to look at whether you're well informed about international relations. The second area that you can go is into, you can deepen into academics. And that means either do a PhD subsequent to your master's. You could even go into an entire think tank career. And there are so many think tanks that are now coming up in India. We have some of the most prominent ones like ORF, which is the Observer
Yeah,
Research
yeah.
Foundation. We have Gateway House in Mumbai. We have the National Maritime Foundation. There are many others, right? Even the ministry has plenty of them. So one can either go into academics from a think tank career, or do a PhD, even go abroad. That's another career. So that's academics. The third aspect is, an important concept has emerged in the world today because of geopolitics, called geopolitical risk management. And many companies now are very concerned about, because they're global companies, they operate in different geographies.
Right.
And so, unless you are sufficiently sensitized to global geographies, your company will not know how to navigate the minefield of that geopolitics. You may get trapped.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
as a student, let's say you're put into a certain senior leadership position of a company, and you're asked to either open up markets for your company in that country or in that region. If you don't understand the politics, society, you're not sensitized towards it, you're not going to be able to bring the best returns to your company. So geopolitical risk management is something that now is a career possibility, and companies are very keen to hire analysts who they don't call as trade analysts per se, they call them strategic analysts.
Yeah.
So they will basically give you insights into what's happening in those particular regions, what are the latest developments, and what to follow, what not to follow, etc. The fourth pathway that exists is, if you want to do something concerning trade, then you could probably blend a master's in international relations, let's say, with a diploma from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. And that prepares you then for a career where you can actually be a trade analyst or a trade specialist for companies.
And
Many
how much
companies,
does it pay you, like once you get
Yeah,
at a
so-
junior level?
yeah, so at a junior level, look, the point is, now the one problem is that you can't really scale this up against some of the let's say salaries in the scientific field, but it can have you gainfully employed anywhere between, let's say, 40 to 50,000 rupees
A month.
a month, right? You can start off, maybe think tanks a little lesser because you're in a junior position, but it all depends on what skills you bring to the table.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They could deploy you in certain geographies, they could send you abroad for certain areas, right? So that's how it happens. So this is the fourth area. And the fifth area is, if you are essentially passionate about activism, which many people are, then there is a huge scope in the NGO sector as well. Like, you have NGOs in India, but you also have global NGOs with India offices. So,
Yes.
for example, you have Oxfam, which works on international development. You have Human Rights Watch, you have Amnesty International, and you have the World Wildlife Fund. There are so many of them who work, Greenpeace. They all have offices in India.
Yes. Yes.
Again, they're looking for students who not only have a certain inclination for activism and advocacy, policy advocacy, but who understand the complexities and the dynamics of the issues that are happening today.
Yes.
So I would say these are the 5 broad areas where careers can be developed
Yes.
in the field of IR.
That one, I haven't heard of all these. I knew like career options in academics and
Yeah.
like the strategy analyst, but those other 3 options would be much benefiting to people who want to make their career
Sure.
in that. So moving forward with it, let's get to the point and discuss the contours of India's foreign strategy, foreign policy strategy, or whatever the international relations that India maintains with the other countries. So, what is your take on that? What is the India's current marketing strategy? What it has been before? Like, if we can get a brief on that.
So this is a very fundamental question. So let me preface it by setting the stall out on what kind of a world are we living in? What are the basic characteristics of the world today? The first thing that we are seeing, and I think it's a kind of a no-brainer, that there is this major power conflict which is developing between US and China. Many people call it Cold War 2.0. While it is Cold War 2.0, many people also say it is like the Cold War 1.0. But it's not a Cold War like that, for the simple reason, when the United States and the Soviet Union were at loggerheads in the 20th century, they did not engage each other on a regular basis. They did not have diplomatic socialization on a regular basis. They were not engaged in trade with each other, right? They were not signing up treaties with each other. Today, US and China are at loggerheads with each other. But even as they do that, there is more than $500 billion of trade that they do with each other. They are technologically intertwined at various levels. There are Chinese industries who have made the American industries who have made investment in China, and China has bought into American debt. So they are intertwined. But there is a global big power competition that India has to take into account. Because, as they say, when the elephants are going to mow the grass, others are going to feel the collateral damage. So, as a smaller economy, we have to take that into account. We also have a more adversarial relationship between US and Russia. And this matters to us because while the US is a vibrant strategic partner for India in comprehensive terms,
yes,
and we believe that this is a country that is going to be our best exponent to
yes,
facilitate national development, Russia remains our trusted ally, an ally that has stood the test of time for the last 50 years.
yes,
And even today, our relationship with Russia, we always say, is not contingent or impacted by any other relationship. So that's another factor that Indian
Yeah.
foreign policy has to take into account. The third point is, even though we have these big players, at loggerheads, we are now living in more of a multilateral world or a multipolar world, where there are many power centers that have emerged around the world. These may not be global power centers, they may still largely be regional power centers,
yes,
but we call them middle powers. So the likes of Japan, the likes of Australia, the likes of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, okay, South Africa, and there are many others. While India may not necessarily be a middle power, we are probably between a middle power and a global power. The center of gravity today in world affairs is being driven by these middle powers. So United States and China, as these two heavyweights, are trying to win over as many middle powers as possible into their camp to be able to influence the strategic center of gravity.
yes.
So this is another factor that Indian foreign policy has to take into account. Having said that, we live in an interdependent and an interconnected world, as the pandemic showed us. The good point about India today is India is showing the world what an independent strategic autonomy path is. And let me begin with what I see as India's fundamental plus point. The fact that India has a democracy that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, and we are able to achieve 6.5% growth rate within a democratic setup. All this at a time when democracies around the world are seen chaotic.
Yes.
We are seeing what's happening in America, we are seeing in Europe. There's a lot of democratic chaos, democratic dysfunction. So when you look at India, a stable democracy, a robust economy, okay, a kind of a rising society, is able to show the world a very different path. Secondly, in the field of foreign policy, India is also showing that its own strategic autonomy in world affairs also allows it to be coveted by all the big powers. We can sit very comfortably in a BRICS grouping, which is seen largely as anti-American. We can also sit very comfortably as an invitee, a permanent invitee of the G7, which is seen by China as an anti-China organization. So these are some of the plus points that India has that puts India into a very prominent position today, where everyone sees India as not part of the problem, but everyone sees India as inevitably a part of the solution.
So I agree to whatever you said partially, but at the same time, I feel that India is also being called, like, this is not my individual opinion. It is, I also feel that India is usually described as a swing state. So they say that it is quoted by the West, engaging with Russia, balancing China, and leading the global South. So becoming everyone's friend
Yeah.
gives you like no priority for anyone. It is usually the saying कि जो सबका दोस्त है वो किसी का
किसी का नहीं
दोस्त
होता.
नहीं है. So are we playing the best friend or are we hedging too much?
नहीं, सो इसको ऐसे देखा जा सकता है कि एक तो बात सही है कि भारत जिस स्थिति में अभी है, हम $5 ट्रिलियन की तरफ अग्रसर हैं एज एन इकोनॉमी. हम चाहते हैं कि हम 10, 15, $20 ट्रिलियन पहुंचे. हम चाहते हैं कि हम एक प्रॉस्परस नेशन बना पाएं. इनफैक्ट हमने बताया है कि हम एक लीडिंग नेशन बनना चाहते हैं, बट वी ऑल्सो डिस्क्राइब आवरसेल्व्स एज अ ब्रिज पावर. So I would put it this way.
Yes, yes.
While you call it a swing state, I'll call it a bridge power. For a long time, we were swinging and oscillating between various options
Yeah.
in a kind of an escapist way.
Yes.
But today, when the world is fragmented, when the world is today wedged and
Yes.
driven by a lot of conflicts, if there is one country in whom faith is placed, it is in India and it is in Prime Minister Modi. I'll give you one example. It is because of the fact that Prime Minister Modi has this exceptional relationship with the Europeans, with the Americans and the Russians, that he's probably right now the only leader who is being asked in this current Russia-Ukraine conflict to mediate. The Europeans have been saying we would look at Prime Minister Modi to mediate.
Yes.
There was a time when Xi Jinping was looked at as a kind of a mediator,
Yes.
but he dissipated.
Yes.
Like sea foam, as they like to say, he dissipated. President Erdogan of Turkey was also seen as a mediator, but he did not have that kind of political capital. India may have been a swing state, but India has sufficient, equity in these relations, serious equity in the relations, which is why a Putin tells Modi, find a solution. A Zelensky, when Modi puts an arm around Zelensky, he says, you're the man who can find a solution, right? The European Commission says, you're the person who can talk to the Americans, to the Russians. And the Americans also, by and large, all these years, have looked at, Prime Minister Modi as relationship. So I don't see this necessarily as some kind of a negative. I see this as a positive, that India is able to bridge different paradoxes, contradictions. And that is because India brings credibility.
Yes.
India brings actionability.
But I think the Modi government's tenure has actually, they have been campaigning for, which is Amritkaal.
Yeah.
So I think that is definitely the golden, like it's golden period of Indian foreign policy. Like these 14 years have been extremely benefiting us because of Modi's participation in world politics and bringing India into the center of geopolitics. So the next question to the same is, there is a debate which is going on that is of India versus Bharat. The new laws have come up. Everybody, they're saying that why everything is being replaced by Bharat. Like for example, the new criminal laws, Bharatiya Nyaya Sahita, Bharatiya Nyaya Suraksha Sahita. So is this only a domestic debate, or this is also something that concerns our international relations as well? In like from the foreign perspective, if global leaders or the global audience is watching India, so do they also see India versus Bharat as we, the common man, sees it? Because there are two kinds of ideology which is, ruling this debate. So
yeah, so let's put it this way. Firstly, at the international level, let's see it in two ways. There's a kind of dichotomy that is working. First of all, a rising India is definitely seen as a positive effect for world governance.
True.
And to that extent, that is coveted. So a rising India is not necessarily seen as an India that is leaving Bharat behind, or that India is progressing at the expense of Bharat. I think this is a very facetious issue that has been created.
Yes.
But yes, a rising Bharat also irks many stakeholders in the world. And we have seen that as India tries to practice strategic autonomy at a very bold level, at a very substantive level, there are many stakeholders in the world who are uncomfortable with not just the rise of India, but the rise of civilizational India. Now, what we must understand is we are not a country that was born on a particular date. We were not born on 15th of August 1947. We only became politically independent on that day. True. But as the Prime Minister very rightly said when he got the baton from President Jokowi in 2022 to host G20 in 2023, in his welcoming address, he said India is the cradle, the genuine cradle, and the mother of all democracies.
True.
Because for us, democracy did not begin in 1947. Through centuries and thousands of years of the annals of Indian history, we have practiced governance, democracy, statecraft, etc. When these civilizational tenets are seen as rising, it does create some, if I may say, disquiet in certain parts of the world, which would like to see a weak India, which would like to see an India that still imports food from the world like we did in the 1960s. But no, India is actually taking steps to become food secure, right? which would like to see India dependent on energy imports,
True.
not just of crude but also of coal, and would not like to see India really become not just energy secure but energy independent. So those factors exist. Now, as far as India and Bharat is concerned, there is no contradiction. In fact, the constitution itself has read,
Yes,
right?
the article
Yeah,
1.
exactly. In fact, in
Yeah.
the preamble also it is said that India and Bharat are to be read interchangeably. And that's
Okay.
why when this whole argument was made, when there was a nameplate that
Yeah.
read Bharat, and there was even some rumor that the Prime Minister and the government is going to ask the United Nations to change Bharat's, India's name to Bharat. There was no need for it. It was just a reflection of the fact that during the G20, we wanted to put across the message
Yes.
that when India leads, India doesn't just lead as a country, India leads as a civilizational country. We bring some civilizational wisdom to the table, and that is why it happened. But I would take that forward and talk about the fact that what we are doing today is not just building strategic autonomy, but we are actually bringing the best value systems back into our governance process and into our policy making. So when we are giving our due, let's say, to those ancestors and forefathers who did not get their due. So for example, while we all talk of Chanakya Niti, Chanakya Niti was not taught the way it should have been taught as part of
Yes.
statecraft. I can give an example since I'm in the profession of international relations. We teach theories of international relations as a
Yes.
core paper. If you see the syllabus all over India, that syllabus rarely has anything on Indian theories.
Very, very, very well
We
said.
are all the time talking Morgenthau, and as if all wisdom
Has been
only
taken.
emanated in the West.
Yes.
And we are a country that has to be just benefactors, living on their benediction.
Yes.
Why haven't we taught Chanakya Niti?
Yes.
Why don't we talk about Arthashastra in the way in which it must be taught?
So the same thing that you're saying is also with the legal education as well. We have a very core subject in our curriculum, which is jurisprudence. We're always focusing on the Western authors. We are talking about Austin, we are talking about Savigny, we are talking about etc. etc.
Right.
But we are not taught Nyaya Shastra.
Yeah.
And it has to do with not only with the legal education, but I think in the at the time that we're in school as well. Why are we being taught French Revolution so much, Russian Revolution so
Absolutely.
much? So I think that's the fault with the education curriculum that needs to be reformed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the same, moving forward with this, we usually, so India, if I have to define India's foreign policy, so I feel especially its participation at the United Nations. It feels like a Bollywood movie, which is, how do I put it, that it is having romance with the West. It is actioning with China. It is a thriller with Pakistan, and at last it's a comedy with the United Nations. I feel that the real power, the power realities are not reflected at the United Nations.
True.
If 21st century is not of India, then when? Is it just a formality that we are doing and just sitting as a puppet or like any other thing? Because I think UN has to do something with it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question because it goes to the heart of global governance.
Yes.
Now, there are two things here. First of all, when we talk of the international liberal order, it's often seen as being synonymous with a Western shaped international order. Because post World War II, the United States came into a position where they were able to shape the world and the worldview from their own context. And what we saw was the United Nations essentially became the upshot or the result or the outpost of a victor's arrangement. So all the exceptional privileges were built into the United Nations, including the veto, which went to the 5 permanent members, and the rest were left, as have-nots. When Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in the late 60s, the treaty made a cozy club of 5 countries to be secure in the NPT, that they could retain their weapons program, and the others were told a nuclear weapon is not safe in your hands. Now, who are 5 countries in a privileged lot to tell the world that the value system that the world will essentially operate by is a value system that we will create and you will blindly follow.
Yes.
And if you see India, even that time, Indira Gandhi stood up to this kind of injustice. And even today, we stand up to any kind of injustice. So, what we have asked is, if multilateralism, which is what the United Nations actually espouses, we have been saying that the United States, the UN has reached a moment of reckoning. It has to ask itself that almost 80 years later, since the time that it has been formed, is it really serving the cause of global multilateralism and global governance the
Yes.
way it is meant to be?
Yes.
Is there justice in that system? Is there equality in that system? Is there equity built into that system? Is it truly reflective of the multilateral power realities of today? And the fact is, it is not. So, India has said that from day one, we were a founding member of the United Nations. We have been a member that has always contributed our funding requirements to the United Nations. We have been one of the countries with the longest serving troop contributions to UN peacekeeping. We never stay out of any activity that the United Nations does, which is legitimate, of course. And we consider UN actions to be legitimate.
Right.
So if there are certain actions that do not find the sanction of the United Nations, India does not enter there, just like the invasion of Iraq. However, we have also come to realize that a country like India has to fight its backside off to be able to say that it deserves a permanent seat at the UN high table. If that is what the United Nations is all about, a United Nations that will not accept legitimate countries from joining an expanded Security Council.
Yes.
If India will not get its due, then India today, which speaks up for the global South and the issues in the global South, India and the global South will find various other mechanisms to deal with.
Yes.
And today we are in a world where we are talking, so India's position is reformed and innovative multilateralism. So we want two things. We want reform in the United Nations. In fact, not just in the United Nations, we are for reform of all these Western structures and architectures, which seem to still reflect the anachronistic power realities. So we are for reform of the World Bank. We are for reform of the International Monetary Fund. Why should it be so that a World Bank should always be headed by an American? And why is it so that the IMF should always be hemmed by a European? What is so sacrosanct about that? Are we still living in a white man's club? But this is a world today where the global South drives many of the processes, strategic processes in the world today. So we are for reformed and innovative multilateralism. If the UN will not reform itself,
then it has
India and the world will find other options to make global governance effective and democratic.
That may even lead to the end of United Nations, probably, or
Possibly,
not.
yes. I mean, not that everyone's wanting it, but that's a question that people ask.
Yeah, that is.
And of course, Trump himself has poured cold water over various aspects of the United Nations. He's now talked of walking out of the WHO,
Yes.
which is, in fact, he's already announced it and he's
That was my
going.
other question. Yeah.
So it's a specialized agency. So who knows? And we are also seeing another reality crop up, that as America seems to be abdicating its position because of democratic chaos and dysfunction at home, there is a very discernible rise of China to prominence within the UN system. There are certain very important agencies within the United Nations now, which China is coveting.
Yes.
Now, given the hegemony that China seems to espouse, are we saying that multilateralism is going to swing from Western hegemony that dominated for the better part of the last 80 years to another 80 years of Chinese hegemony? And that India and the global South have to choose between these two as if they are the only binaries? That's not acceptable to India.
Yes. A little personal question. Why did you not choose to be a diplomat? Why did you choose to be an academician only? Because I think you should be someone who... that is one question that I have.
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. It's a very personal question. I myself, when I was very serious about this profession, for some time I was toying with the idea of foreign service and being in the diplomatic corps. But it's a very interesting thing. So I got a Fulbright and I went off to the United States in 2005. I was at Johns Hopkins SAIS and working under Professor Bill Zartman. So before I left back for home, he hosted me for a barbecue lunch at his residence. And he said, I want to have a heart-to-heart talk with you. So he asked me, he said, look, you're very brilliant in terms of analysis, your articulation, your eloquence, your breadth of understanding. And this was then, 2005. He said, you also told me that you want to join this, civil service back home. He said, while I'm no expert at this, but having seen American civil service as well, he said, I don't think you might necessarily be cut out for civil service. Because the fact is, in the civil service, you don't necessarily encourage free thinking.
Yes.
At the end of the day, the bureaucratic steel frame has to essentially work with the political leadership, and you are subservient to the political leadership. So in that sense, it becomes very difficult to speak your mind. And when you are an independent, free-thinking person, it becomes very difficult for you to essentially be bound by a regimented thinking. For example, if I was here and you were hosting me today, two things I would be doing. I would be either reading from a prepared script, and what a boring podcast would it be, right? Not just for you, but maybe for your viewers as well.
Yes.
Or second, at every stage, I would be saying, maybe I can't opine on this matter. Or maybe, ये मेरे व्यक्तिगत विचार है, ये मेरे देश के विचार नहीं है, मेरे सरकार के विचार नहीं है. तो इस तरह की जो दुविधा में हम रहते हैं,
प्रोटोकॉल,
तो उसमें ऐसे होता है कि आपके जो एनिमल स्पिरिट्स होते हैं, आपके बेस्ट स्पिरिट्स होते हैं, वो जागरूक नहीं होते हैं. तो मैंने तभी सोच लिया कि, और मैंने अप्लाई भी नहीं किया, तो मैंने तभी सोचा कि मेरे अंदर जिस तरह के गुण हैं वो एनालिसिस के हैं, वो एकेडमिक्स के हैं. बट एकेडमिक्स होने के कारण आप दो तरह के एकेडमिक्स होते हैं. एक होते हैं जो बस एक तरह की थ्योरेटिकल एकेडमिक्स करके बैठ जाते हैं, उसका पॉलिसी रेलेवेंस नहीं होता. तो इसीलिए आज जब सरकार भी कहती है कि हम एकेडमिक्स के साथ इंटरेक्ट करना चाहते हैं, लेकिन एकेडमिक्स उस लेवल के नहीं होते कि वो पॉलिसी रेलेवेंट चीजें समझाएं, राइट? वो आके आपको बस एक थ्योरेटिकल फ्रेमवर्क देंगे. जो गवर्नमेंट को थ्योरेटिकल फ्रेमवर्क की जरूरत नहीं है, गवर्नमेंट को एनालिटिकल फ्रेमवर्क की जरूरत है. गवर्नमेंट को प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग चाहिए, क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग चाहिए. अगर उस तरह की एकेडमिक्स आप करें, and I think with all modesty at my command, based on the last almost 15 odd years, which I've been teaching and doing research, I can say that I've become relevant, almost integral to many institutions which have a policy impact on government, simply because I'm able to bring in the kind of analysis which is of course interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So no regrets for not joining the service.
You said that your work, but I think there is a maxim called, we are being taught, res ipsa loquitur. So your work speaks for itself, I think.
Thank you.
Have you ever met ministers from the Ministry of External Affairs, or have you had a interaction with the foreign ministers at any point of your life? And if so, then how did it turn out? Or meeting Modi maybe for a...
Oh yes, absolutely. So see, what happens is, I must make it very clear here that of course my professional activity has always required me to be in touch with the ministry. I've also had the pleasure of working with joint secretaries. आपको joint secretaries के साथ काम करना पड़ता है. So joint secretaries हो, ambassadors हो, उनसे काफी चर्चा होती थी. Specifically foreign ministers से नहीं होती थी until let's say the last 10 years. But जहाँ तक मोदी जी का सवाल है, 2009 में मुझे एक अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली, बिकॉज मनोहर पर्रिकर जी जिनके साथ मैंने काफी काम किया है, नॉट इन अ फॉर्मल वे, इनफॉर्मल वे, एंड आई न्यू हिम वेरी वेल फ्रॉम हिज फर्स्ट इलेक्शन. मतलब कहने की बात है कि 1994 में जब पहली बार वो कॉन्टेस्ट कर रहे थे पणजी असेंबली कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी के लिए, तब मैं 9th स्टैंडर्ड में था. और मुझे याद है कि स्कूल खत्म होने के बाद 2, 2:30, 3 बजे से जो कैंपेनिंग हम सब करते थे, उसमें मैं भी शिरकत करता था. तो एक बार जब वो वहां से गुजर रहे थे, सो ही न्यू मी, हैड सीन मी, तो उनको इतना प्रेम आया कि उन्होंने एक्चुअली मुझे ऐसे ऐसे किया, like saying how sweet of you, that kind of thing, caught my cheeks and said how sweet of you, because अभी मैं स्कूल के यूनिफॉर्म के कपड़ों में था और मैं जाके लोगों को बता रहा हूँ, 14 साल का बच्चा, लेकिन क्या बोल रहा है, हमारे पास एक IIT ग्रेजुएट MLA बनने की फिराक में है, उसको हमने MLA बनाना चाहिए, पणजी का प्रोफाइल चेंज करना है. सो आई हैड द प्लेजर ऑफ नोइंग लेट मनोहर पर्रिकर. तो 2009 में जब वो लीडर अपोजिशन थे, तो उन्होंने मुझसे कहा कि गुजरात का जो गवर्नेंस मॉडल है उसको स्टडी करना है. तो मैं और मेरा और एक दोस्त, हम दोनों साथ साथ गए और मैं गुजरात गया. तो उसके पहले मोदी जी से मेरी मतलब फ्लीटिंग मुलाकातें हुई थी, उस बार मेरी मीटिंग हुई. एंड देयर आर लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स दैट आई लर्नड अबाउट द मैन, स्टडीइंग द मैन, व्हिच आई वेरी ओपनली टॉक अबाउट. ही इज वेरी प्रोफेशनल अबाउट हिज मीटिंग्स. तो आप मीटिंग के लिए आ रहे हैं तो ऐसा नहीं चलो दत्तेश जी आ रहे हैं, वो तो बीजेपी से कनेक्टेड है, कुछ संघ से भी कनेक्टेड है, तो चलो आ रहे हैं, एक कैजुअल चर्चा हो जाएगी आधे घंटे, आई विल फाइंड टाइम. नो, ही वॉज वेरी क्लियर कि वो आ रहा है किसी उद्देश्य से, और वो उद्देश्य क्या है कि मॉडल ऑफ गवर्नेंस जो गुजरात का है उसको स्टडी करना है। तो उसके टीम ने मुझसे लिंक अप करके बोला कि मोदी जी, आप अगर आपके पास कोई प्रेजेंटेशन हो, बिकॉज मोदी जी लाइक्स टू गो वेरी सिस्टमैटिकली और वेरी पर्पसफुल, वो चर्चा आपसे करेंगे, चार्मिंग चर्चा करेंगे, लेकिन जब बात करनी है तो बात सिस्टमैटिक होनी चाहिए। तो दे रिक्वेस्टेड फॉर अ पीपीटी फ्रॉम मी, सो देन आई अंडरस्टूड कि कोई पॉलिटिशियन अगर इस तरह से पीपीटी मांग रहा है, आप सोचिए आप किसी पॉलिटिशियन से जा रहे हैं मिलने के लिए, बोले अच्छा आ जाओ, जो मुंह में आएगा मैं बोल दूंगा,
बोल दोगे।
नॉट लाइक दैट, सिस्टमैटिक काम करेंगे। तो मुझसे मिले, आधा घंटा बात हुई, एंड इट वाज लाइक अ वेरी टचिंग थिंग। व्हेन आई वाज लीविंग आई थॉट इट्स माय ओनली मीटिंग विद हिम, अभी हो गई। उन्होंने कहा मेरे ब्यूरोक्रेट्स आपको पूरा कॉपरेशन देंगे, उन्होंने कुछ ब्यूरोक्रेट्स को असाइन भी किया था काम। तो मैं जब जा रहा था तो मैंने कहा कि मोदी जी आपके साथ एक तस्वीर खींचनी थी, फोटो, और आपकी ऑटोग्राफ चाहिए था आपकी किताब पे। तो उन्होंने कहा कि क्यों आज ही, आप हमसे उब गए क्या, मतलब द वे वाज यू आर टायर्ड ऑफ टॉकिंग टू मी, डोंट मीट मी अगेन। तो मैंने कहा जी समझ में नहीं आया। बोले वापस नहीं मिलेंगे हमसे।
Because you thought it was the last
आई
meeting.
थॉट इट वाज वन एंड ओनली मीटिंग।
Hmm.
कौन सा पॉलिटिशियन आपको इतनी क्लोजली, आपको बारीकी से आपको मीटिंग्स देगा। बोले एक मीटिंग हो गया बस, सोशलाइजेशन है। तो मैंने कहा नहीं, जरूर मिलना चाहेंगे, आप मिलिए मुझसे, आपका अध्ययन होने के बाद गोवा जाने से पहले आप मुझे मिलिए। नाउ आई अंडरस्टूड मेरा एग्जाम होने वाला है, मतलब बिना एग्जाम भी नहीं छोड़ने वाले। बट यू सी द स्टाइल ऑफ टॉकिंग,
Yes, yes, yes.
ही डिडंट से कि आपको मेरे सामने प्रेजेंटेशन पेश करना है। उन्होंने क्या कहा, मुझसे वापस नहीं मिलना चाहेंगे, कौन नहीं मिलना चाहेगा उनसे, लेकिन उन्होंने कहा हम बात करेंगे। एंड आई न्यू दैट ही वाज गोइंग टू आस्क मी कि आपका क्या निष्कर्ष है
Yes.
ओवर 9-10 days. And there are certain things I should take some time and mention, because these are the unknown things about him. A lot of people don't know the personal side to him. Every day his PA or his OSD, let's say, would call me in the evening around 7-7:30 and say, Dattesh ji, आपका दिन कैसे गया, आपकी मीटिंग्स जैसे प्लान थी वैसे हुई, आपको कोऑपरेशन मिला, कहीं आपको कुछ लगा कि आपको सेटिस्फैक्शन नहीं मिला, किसी मीटिंग में इंफॉर्मेशन कम थी, डिटेल्ड ब्यौरा हर दिन वो लेते थे, ओके, उनके जो ओएसडी थे। एंड आई एम श्योर ही मस्ट हैव बीन रिपोर्टिंग इट बैक टू मोदी जी कि सब ठीक चल रहा है। जब मैं लास्ट डे गया तो मुझे घर पे बुलाया, मैं गया, व्हाट वाज मेंट टू बी अ 15-20 मिनट मीटिंग बिकेम ए 1 hour प्लस मीटिंग। और मैं कहूं कि उनकी कैबिनेट होने वाली थी, कैबिनेट के ऑलरेडी मेंबर्स आए हुए थे, उनके जब ओएसडी अंदर आए एक दो बात उन्होंने कहा कि हाँ थोड़ा रुको थोड़ा रुको, सो ही वांटेड टू एंगेज। और उसमें उन्होंने मुझे एक दो चीजें जो कही वाज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, और उनके गवर्नेंस में आज वो दर्शाई जा रही हैं। एक जो उन्होंने मुझे बात कही, मुझे कहा कि पीपल्स पार्टिसिपेशन क्या होता है। तो एक आंगनवाड़ी की स्टोरी उन्होंने मुझे बताई कि आंगनवाड़ी के जो बच्चे हैं, उनके पास कोई खिलौने नहीं, कुछ करने के नहीं है, दैट काइंड ऑफ थिंग। एंड ही न्यू that there are a lot of toys in people's houses which people kids play for a while and throw around, तो ऐसे बहुत पड़े होते हैं। तो उन्होंने कहा क्यों ना हम ऐसा काम करें कि अहमदाबाद म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन, उनको कहा आप एक मुहिम शुरू करो, लोगों के घर जाओ और उनको बोलो क्या आप इस आंगनवाड़ी के बच्चों के लिए कोई घर में से एक आपके बच्चे का टॉय जो ये बच्चा अभी यूज नहीं करता है, राइट, क्या आप देना चाहेंगे। पहले लोगों ने उसको ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस नहीं दिया, बिकॉज अपनी चीज क्या होती है, टूटी फूटी होती है तो भी कोई किसी को देता नहीं है, राइट। हमारी ये सोसाइटी है कि नहीं रहने दो मेरे घर में, किसी को दे दिया मतलब मेरा लॉस हो गया। यू सी हाउ ही ट्राइज टू ब्रिंग टू ह्यूमन बीइंग्स, टू सिटीजंस टुगेदर इन पब्लिक पार्टिसिपेशन। पहले कुछ नहीं हुआ, थोड़े दिन का कुछ नहीं हुआ, जब सेकेंड राउंड शुरू हुए तो बच्चों ने शायद अंदर सुना कि ये किसको दिया जा रहा है, किसी साइकोल्ड अनाथ बच्चे को या आंगनवाड़ी के बच्चों को। उन्होंने जब सेकेंड राउंड चालू किया, पेरेंट्स वर सेइंग लाइक व्हाई यू कमिंग एंड ट्रबलिंग अस। तो बहुत बार इट्स ऐसे हुआ, अंदर से बच्चे भागे भागे आए और बोला कि अंकल आप ये ले जाइए। अब ये बच्चा अपना टॉय, ही इज पार्टिंग विद दैट टॉय फॉर अनदर बच्चा whom he has not met, whom he has not seen. This is called connecting one citizen to the other in public participation. तो जब उन्होंने एक गैस सब्सिडी जो उन्होंने लाई ना, जो उन्होंने कहा कि मिडिल क्लास अपना गैस सब्सिडी दे दे और वो हम देंगे उन औरतों को जो चूल्हे पे अपने कुकिंग करती हैं, सब करती हैं। हमने जो गैस सब्सिडी छोड़ी, क्या हमने देखा है कौन से चूल्हे वाली औरत को उन्होंने दिया है, वी डोंट नो, बट हमें बिलीफ है क्योंकि हमें पता है कि वो दिया जा रहा है। तो जब 1 करोड़ महिलाओं को जब ये मिलता है और हम इसको दे रहे हैं, दिस इज द सेम पब्लिक पार्टिसिपेशन जो उन्होंने आंगनवाड़ी की स्टोरी बताई। सो आई हैड दिस ग्रेट कनेक्ट विद हिम and it was absolutely fabulous. I remain in touch with him. Of course, since 2014, 15, of course, I didn't join the government, or I didn't want to, because again, वही होता है कि,
वही होता है.
मेरा free spirit नहीं होता. But whenever I get an opportunity, I speak on many of the aspects that he told me. Of course, we have constraints of time here.
True.
But there are many aspects that have left, kind of an indelible mark on me
Yes.
in my conversations with Honorable Modi ji.
Sir, that is something that I have also observed in his, in his speeches, the way he, delivers whatever. Like
Yeah.
I think he's very crisp with his words. He doesn't, beat around the
Right.
bush basically. And I think his digital marketing is something that has to, we have to give a. So recently what happened is,
Yeah.
I've been following all these trends from both the sides, not only this. But I think Modi government's digital campaigning, and also it has reflected the way, digital technology has come to India. We have shifted to online payment systems that has been appreciated not only in India but worldwide. And similarly, the opposition also tries to do that. But I want to, through you, like, there could be a message given that we should not take everything very, like in the terms of, because people believe, they don't cross check whatever that is shown to them by a particular political party. For example, recently, after the death of Manmohan Singh, so there has been a reel of this shairi game between
Ah,
Sushma
Swaraj
Swaraj,
and
and
him, yes,
and then
yes.
they said that माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ, तू मेरा शौक देख, तू मेरा इंतजार देख. So it, तो बहुत लोग नीचे कमेंट्स के नीचे मनमोहन सिंह रिस्पेक्ट बटन, मनमोहन सिंह रिस्पेक्ट बटन, हेटरेड बटन फॉर मोदी जी. This is all, it is not good. Even ठीक है, he could be a prime minister जब मनमोहन सिंह का tenure था, he may have his ups and downs. But I think this real generation, and especially because it is affecting the youth,
Yeah.
which is the major, comprises the major population of our country, they need to at least think that whatever is being projected to them, they should not be taking it very seriously. They should cross check, have their own opinion, have their own mindset. They should work in tandem and then form an opinion. So I just want your view on that.
Yeah. So, in this, the first point that should be made is आज का जो जिस तरह का social media age है, it's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
On one hand, it has democratized information,
Hmm.
because anybody and everybody now, if he has knowledge, doesn't need necessarily a platform to be given by somebody. He can have his own platform, and if he's really up to the mark with his knowledge, with his data, with his information, can actually educate people, sensitize people, and can do a lot of public diplomacy,
Yes.
externally and internally, which was not happening before. पहले only some elites could do it if they had access to power, and you couldn't do it. But ये democratization में हमेशा ऐसे ही होता है कि it is subject to abuse. So it's become over democratized.
Yes.
Right? So today, unfortunately, anybody and everybody on the road has become an intellectual. Everybody has become an expert. कुछ articles पढ़ लिए तो मैं भी IR expert हो गया. I can talk on anything. And therefore they make very, very, frivolous remarks, if I may say so.
Yes.
Usme there is a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of misguiding, and many people who now don't have an attention span beyond 60 seconds or beyond 90 seconds are falling prey to this. Now, how to come out of this? Firstly, you are a victim of your own, context. So this context is going to remain.
Yes.
There is no way you can fight this, because you can't turn your backs now on technology. We are prisoners of technology, and it's becoming an increasingly technological age. But I still feel that there is a scope in this world for good, sensible people, right, to be able to put a good view across. But we must understand this, that even when sensible people are putting a view across,
They are also.
it's a very thin line between propaganda and actually putting out good information. Like, I have a great deal of respect for Palki Sharma Upadhyay, right? I mean, she's become right now absolutely the doyen when it comes to, international relations. And, full marks to her. She was able to leverage this platform, right?
Yes.
Grow herself as well from just being a news anchor to being one of the most phenomenal, speakers on international relations today. However, you must also point out बट ये कोई लोग करते नहीं है कि थोड़ा जाके पृष्ठभूमि में देखें कितनी बार उन्होंने कुछ कुछ चीजें कही हैं कि शी जिनपिंग का भी अंत होने वाला है, शी जिनपिंग ने ज्यादा कर दिया, चाइना गिर रहा है, चाइना ये हो रहा है, मतलब प्रोपेगेंडा जो चलाया है, यू अंडरस्टैंड, कोई भी बात सिद्ध हुई है? लाइक उन्होंने कहा कि हांगकांग जो हुआ दैट इज गोइंग टू स्वॉलो शी जिनपिंग, कुछ हुआ क्या? तो क्या होता है, एट सम लेवल यू स्टार्ट क्वेश्चनिंग, कहीं ये राइट विंग प्रोपेगेंडा की मतलब भेंट नहीं चढ़ गई है, या लेफ्ट विंग प्रोपेगेंडा की भेंट नहीं चढ़ गई। That's why when I told you now what I told you, and that is something that I follow in life, that while everyone may still know my political inclination, that is very visible, I still somehow it doesn't allow me to just become a propagandist. I can put my best view across and convert you to my point of view on the strength of my argument. I don't need to varnish my argument. It's only where I feel that either I have a weak argument or I'm not capable of convincing you on the strength of my argument, that is when I have to smear or color my argument. So like I told you, you don't have to question Mr. Modi, or you don't have to support Mr. Modi and everything, but you must understand that criticizing Mr. Modi, okay, and criticizing India are two things you have to be very concerned about, okay, how you do it. तो इसीलिए ऐसा हो गया है कि influence makers, अब देखो हाल ही में जो गोवा में हुआ, right, there were some of these influence mobilizers who basically started putting out all kinds of blogs and pieces, etc., even putting out some small reels and podcasts saying that Goa ka tourism crash ho gaya hai. Right?
And that affected.
I mean, this is the way you play psychological warfare. आप कोई data देखते, in fact, the data that they quoted is so, if I may say, silly, right? They even were quoting millions of people coming as tourists to Goa. Goa का कहाँ से millions मिलते हैं? गोवा का कुछ लैक्स मिलते हैं, और गोवा का फॉरेन टूरिस्ट इज अ स्मॉल प्रोपोर्शन ऑफ ओवरऑल टूरिस्ट। तो आप लूज कमेंट्स करते हो, यू इम्पैक्ट इकोनॉमीज, यू इम्पैक्ट सोसाइटीज, सो वन हैज टू बी वेरी कंसर्न्ड अबाउट what you say. But yes, I fully agree that kind of hate campaign must not happen, and let me tell you,
for any party,
मैं आपको एक बताता हूँ very interestingly, अपनी वाणी पे कैसे कंट्रोल करना ये लोगों को समझ में आना चाहिए। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, सोनिया गांधी यूज द वर्ड्स मौत के सौदागर for Modi after 2002 Gujarat riots. I don't know whether she understands the enormity even today, but they have paid a very heavy price for that. Mr. Modi, like any smart politician, will use your self goal and will play it back on you. And he made it an issue of Gujarati अस्मिता. He said ये एक बंदे के लिए नहीं कहा है, 6 करोड़ गुजरातियों को उसने मौत का सौदागर कहा है. This was something she needed to understand. But prepared text होता है तो आपको कुछ समझ में आता नहीं है, जो दूसरे लिख के देते हैं वो आप बोलते हैं, राइट? लेकिन मोदी जी के मुंह से भी गलती हुई है. मोदी जी ने 2014 में जब उन्होंने अरविंद केजरीवाल को AK-47 की उपाधि दी, ओके, उन्होंने उसको AK-47 कहा, तो वो भी अनपार्लियामेंट्री लैंग्वेज था, तो उसको भी घुमा के केजरीवाल ने अपने फेवर में यूज किया. तो व्हाट इट शोज यू इज, पॉलिटिशियंस नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड कि आपको कितने आगे जाना है, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली आपको हेट नहीं क्रिएट करना है. वो कहते हैं ना, आपका मतभेद हो सकता है लेकिन मनभेद नहीं होना चाहिए. अगर मनभेद हो गया, दैट कैन बिकम एनार्की, which we have to guard against.
So wrapping up, we will have a rapid fire.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and it has to be very crisp.
Okay.
So like it could be a one-liner. If one word, then that's great. Or one-liner, that's up to you. So what do you think that India's dream for today and the future is?
Vikasit Bharat, a leading nation, which also is a bridge power.
Okay. If you were drafting the India's foreign policy for 2025, what are those 3 principles that are non-negotiable?
Yeah. So the first thing is strategic autonomy. I think India will choose its partnerships. India will choose what is in its national interest.
Yes.
And will do it unapologetically. Number 1. Number 2, we are going to avoid any kind of zero-sum equations, in the sense that a relationship with one affects the relationship with the other, right? So that is to be avoided, and that is something that requires skillful management.
Yes.
It's not something you can say कि अरे वो तो normal है. उसके लिए आपके all hands on deck चाहिए और आपको skillfully manage करना पड़ता है. And thirdly, very importantly, is how do you connect India's civilizational tapestry, India's economic trajectory, and India's democratic profile. and bring all of that together to leverage and to exhibit power projection on the world stage.
If India's foreign policy
Yeah.
would be a Bollywood plot, whether it would be a Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum or like Gangs of Wasipur, like how do you define it? Like any movie that comes to your mind.
Yeah. So on this, I will just have an easier answer because I don't really watch movies.
Okay.
Okay. So I wouldn't necessarily be comparing, but I would say it is a roller coaster. Okay. One has to accept that in foreign policy there is no victory or defeat. It's an ongoing process. It's an ebb and flow.
So we take
Right?
it as Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum.
Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. Exactly. There will be certain things which will work your way.
Yeah.
Certain things will not work your
They
way.
will not your way.
But ultimately, you have to persist, and you have to have the right principles underpinning and shaping it.
Yes.
Which I think is happening in the maybe the last 11 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two leaders,
Yeah.
world leaders, anybody from past or present that has defined you, or maybe some elements that you want to you want to walk on their footsteps.
Yeah. So I would say, well, I would actually put three of them.
Three. Okay.
Right. I was always fascinated at the global level by Bill Clinton. He's somebody I looked up to in the 1990s. I used to love the way he used to speak in public.
Yes.
His ability to carry himself, amazing energy. So he's somebody I used to almost model myself on. The second was Tony Blair. But from a diplomacy point of view, I think somebody I looked up to was Kofi Annan. Okay, of course, he did get a little smeared by scandal towards the end of his career with the oil for food Volcker report. But Kofi Annan is something I always liked because he was somebody who had a way of articulation. He was able to do some of the toughest negotiations, and United Nations was in its prime equity in the 1990s. There was so much happening in the world, and the UN was being called to play a part. Of course, there were a lot of hits and misses, but he played a key role within as the Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping. And then he, of course, moved and became he was the first Secretary General who came from within the organization to become the UNSG. So his ability to shape diplomacy was something that I always liked to model myself on.
If every diplomat is injected with a truth serum for 24 hours, what is that? What do you think? What is that one geopolitical truth that would bring everyone for in an outrage? And so something saucy.
Well, the truth serum will say that everyone is economical with the truth. And basically it means that there are no eternal friends, there are no eternal foes.
Yeah.
What is eternal is national interest. So each one's national interest is defined optically for the external audiences differently, but internally it is very different. So basically you're asked to be economical with the truth.
Yes.
That's what every diplomat does. In fact, this is how Jaishankar had quoted the American exit from Afghanistan.
Yes, yes.
When he was asked that were the Americans, truthful with you.
Yes.
He said they were economical with the truth. So जितना बोलना था उतना बोला, लेकिन जितना बोलना चाहिए था वो भी नहीं बोला. So वही था. They cut and ran. Zalmai Khalilzad used to be their envoy. He used to keep coming to Delhi. He used to brief us. But we realized that when they cut and ran, they effectively hardly mattered. Indian interests hardly mattered to them.
True.
And we were quite upset with the way in which they kind of, cut and ran.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the three countries that pose as a threat to India's rise?
We don't really go and call it an enemy. You don't call any country as an enemy necessarily.
Yes.
Even Pakistan is not an enemy, but Pakistan is a threat. But I would say China is definitely the most important threat because its actions of omissions and commissions have existential implications for our national security, but also for our national well-being. That's number one. Number two, we have to guard against certain countries which are becoming increasingly rogue countries.
Yes.
And in today's information age, when we are talking AI, we are talking technologies and all kinds of things, countries like North Korea, for instance, it's not directly an enemy of India or a threat to India, but it is a threat to democratic societies by the way in which it practices statecraft. So we have heard of stories where certain North Korean students who came under ITech scholarships, they were not necessarily always accounted for. Or there were a lot of suspicions as to what they're doing in India and whether they would be up to something. And you have to ask this question because in the case of the pandemic, what has been proved is that you can have an invisible threat that goes beyond just a biological weapons convention or a chemical weapons that can be deployed. You can actually have anthrax, you can have any other nerve gas, you can have any
Yes.
agent which can be deployed in your country, any virus that can be deployed. So you have to be concerned of certain, countries that can be called as rogue states. You also have to be concerned about countries that are becoming very hideous when it comes to Islamic ideology. And what I'm saying is, I'm not talking of Islam as an ideology, I'm talking of fundamentalism,
Yes.
right? You have to be concerned. I mean, West Asia is doing fine by turning the corner to the extent possible on that kind of, fundamentalism within Islamic thread that is happening. I think we should look at a country like Indonesia, which has done so very well with its 270 million people. So I would say one is China. I wouldn't really count Pakistan as a threat because I think we've managed to successfully marginalize Pakistan as a threat to us in the sense of what I see as a threat, right? I don't see threat as something happening the next day.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
talking of the next 10, 15, 20
10,
years, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
China definitely, because it looks to undermine you. Countries which can be rogue countries, and I will probably limit it to North Korea, but there can be others as well. And third, definitely countries which take on an Islamic ideology in a rabid, xenophobic way.
Yes.
That's the concern. Islam as an ideology is not the concern, but the
Yeah.
xenophobia is a concern.
Yes.
The rabidness is the concern.
Yes.
And Bangladesh is a good example right now, what's happening in our neighborhood, which we never expected.
Yes, sir. The final question, that we say that diplomacy is about nations. So if we take a chessboard, everybody is a player playing against each other. Diplomacy is one trait that is consistent with everybody. But let's flip the question. What is that one trait that we take from foreign policy, international relation, but we mix it with our personal life? What is that one quality, one trait that every individual in their life should imbibe from these area of subjects?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to exercise restraint. I think that's very important because often we are overindulgent. It can be overindulgence either in a positive sense, but also overindulgence in terms of overreaching. So one thing that a diplomat, let's say, who navigates through international relations realizes, it's better to err on the side of restraint than to err on the side of overindulgence. The second I would say is diplomacy and international relations also teaches you that you need to be pragmatic. It's important, and pragmatism here doesn't mean you are immoral. I think often people have this wrong binary.
Yes.
कि मैंने कहा कि मैं pragmatic हूँ, अच्छा इसका मतलब आपके कोई तत्व नहीं हैं, आप पूरे immoral हैं. You understand?
Yeah.
मैं तो कहता हूँ कि politics by nature, which is what international relations is not immoral, it's amoral. आप morals को बगल में रखते हो और उसको pragmatically देखते हो. So pragmatism is something that all countries practice, all diplomats practice. That pragmatism takes different forms depending on the country and the context you are. I think these are the two traits, restraint and pragmatism, which should shape people's lives for the better.
Yes. With this, we wrap up. But one thing that I would take away is understanding India's foreign policy and whatever bunch of questions that we have asked Dr. Dattesh. I think one is that we have all heard of the Darwin's theory. Initially, it was the muscle power which used to reign the world. Then came the money power. But today, it is the world where mind power is the biggest game. And I think India is the country, not only that we are speculating, the world is speculating that India is a land where the greatest minds are born. And today, we had the honor and privilege to have one with us, Dr. Dattesh. And so you could conclude with whatever your takeaways from the podcast are.
No, firstly, I would like to thank Chehak for this opportunity. I think this freewheeling discussion has been quite enriching for me as well, answering and fronting up to some of these questions which probably came from left field, as they say.
Yes.
Wasn't really expecting them, but they probably bring out the best. And I think this should be seen as one of the opportunities to educate students, educate the younger genre of this country, that you need to get more involved with policy making, because there has been a sense that, we've always said that foreign policy is detached from the public. And in 2010, the Ministry of External Affairs did a very good thing when they began public outreaches to various varsities and colleges through their diplomats. And I would say over the last 10 years in particular, Prime Minister Modi, of course, Sushma ji when she was around, and now Jaishankar ji, have been able to bring foreign policy closer to people's homes. So I think this exercise should be seen in that context, that you should feel a stakeholder, a genuine stakeholder in the rise and the prominence of your country, and see how you can play your best role towards making India Vikasit Bharat, as I say, a leading nation,
Yes.
and also a bridge power in world affairs. So I would also take this opportunity to heartily ask all of you all to like the podcast, to subscribe it, to expand the viewership. I think this is a very good initiative, a student-driven initiative, which must be owned up by students, but which must also be appreciated. So share it on social media, share it on your different handles, and subscribe and like it as much as possible.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir. Thank you so much, sir.